I wish someone had warned me that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives quietly through a voicemail. The suit I wore still held the warmth of the iron. I'd laid it out the night before, matching the tie to the same one I wore when we renewed our vows 10 years ago. I was standing by the mirror, straightening the cuffs when my phone buzzed. One new message from Emily. "Hey, just a heads up. We moved the funeral to this morning. It's already done, don't bother coming." That was it, no apology, no reason, just silence after the click. I replayed it twice. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers locked, wrists shaking. My wife, Grace, was gone, 42 years, and I couldn't even say goodbye. The room felt colder somehow, like her absence had stolen the warmth from the air. I stared at the invitation card she mailed me last week, Saturday at 2 p.m. I looked at the clock. It was 3:17 p.m. She had done it on purpose. Emily used to hold my hand in church when she was little. She used to cry if I left for work too early. Now she didn't want me at her mother's funeral. I called her, no answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I gripped the phone, my knuckles whitening. How did we get here? Was it after she married Derek, after the inheritance talks, or when we refused to sell the house? If anyone's listening, don't make the mistake I did. Don't ignore the signs. I stood, still dressed for a funeral that had already happened, and walked to the living room. The photos were still there, Grace holding Emily as a baby, the three of us in front of the old cherrywood piano. I picked one up, my thumb running across the glass. Grace's smile in that picture felt like it belonged to another life. The phone buzzed again. A message from Maria, Grace's friend. "Just saw the service ended. Where were you? Thought you were coming." So that's what they told everyone. That I didn't show. I sat at the dining table, the one Grace and I picked out at the estate sale in Vermont. Her chair still had the small pillow she used for her back. I stared at it, unmoving. I couldn't bring myself to take it off. That chair had seen every Christmas, every anniversary, every quiet morning with her tea and crossword puzzle. And now it was just empty. Her voice used to echo through this house. Laughter in the hallway, humming while folding laundry, soft good nights. Now all I could hear was that voicemail. Emily's voice, calm, calculated, cold. "Don't bother coming." "But I will." "You can't bury someone like Grace without me standing there. Even if I have to stand in the shadows." I shouldn't have gone, but something in me refused to sit home like a forgotten coat in the closet. Grace deserved more than silence, even if all I could offer her now was presence, even if it came too late. The church sat still under a gray sky, the bell already silent by the time I pulled into the gravel lot. I walked past rows of parked luxury sedans and SUVs, polished, spotless, impersonal. Her daughter's world now. I slipped in through the side door near the vestry, a path I used to take with Grace when we helped with food drives. The soft echo of the organ's final notes faded as I stepped into the shadows of the old wooden beams. There they were. Emily stood at the front, dressed in black silk, her posture straight, chin slightly lifted like someone on stage. Beside her, Derek adjusted his cufflinks, whispering something to her with a smirk. His parents stood near the casket like royalty at a coronation. It looked like a performance, one where I was no longer part of the script. And then I saw it, the front pew. Empty. The seat where I was supposed to sit. The place where Grace had wanted me beside her, even in goodbye. A single white rose lay on the casket, her favorite. I remembered tucking those into her hair when we were young and broke, picking them from the garden behind our first apartment. I remembered the weight of her hand in mine the day we said, "I do." She trembled, not from fear, but from joy. I kissed her knuckles that day. I never forgot how soft they felt. Now I stood in the dark like a stranger. I didn't stay long, just enough to see what I needed to. I walked out the same side door, the cool air biting harder than I expected. My hands felt heavy, like they were dragging chains. "Tom," I turned, Maria, Grace's old friend from choir, bundled in her burgundy coat, eyes red but kind. I didn't see you inside. We all thought, she trailed off, frowning. Emily said you weren't coming. My throat dried instantly. I wasn't told it changed. She looked away, ashamed. I thought it was odd. Grace would have wanted you there. She would have, I said quietly, watching the clouds gather. She made sure of it. Maria nodded, her lips pressed tight. I could tell she didn't know what to believe. That made two of us. I watched the guests exit the church, laughing softly, hugging, exchanging polite grief. None looked my way. This wasn't an oversight. It was an execution. Of memory, of love, of my place. As I walked to my car, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply looked up at the steeple and whispered, "You deserved better, Grace, but I'm still here." Then I drove away, funeral suit still buttoned, hands steady for the first time in days. I left the house before the sun was up, the letter trembling in my coat pocket like a heartbeat I didn't want to feel. I'd memorized the folds of it. I knew the shape of her handwriting through the envelope. Her last words to me, written in blue ink, 1 month before everything fell apart. Emily's porch lights were still on when I pulled up. Not out of warmth. Derek probably forgot to switch them off after whatever wine-fueled dinner they hosted last night. I rang the bell and waited. The cold didn't bite so much as it reminded me I was still alive. Derek answered the door with that same lazy smirk he wore the day he asked me to reconsider the inheritance terms. "Tom," he said, leaning against the frame like it was his. "Didn't expect company." "Is Emily home?" I asked. "She's resting. It's been a heavy week. Maybe come back another time." I didn't move. "I'm not leaving." His eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside with theatrical reluctance. "Suit yourself." The house used to smell like fresh pine and coffee. Now it smelled like perfume samples and entitlement. Emily came down in a silk robe, holding a mug she didn't offer to me. Her hair was perfect, her face unreadable. "You didn't belong there," she said before I opened my mouth. "At the funeral, Mom wouldn't have wanted it." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. She was my wife. We were married 42 years. She tilted her head. "You were there, but you weren't present, Dad." She told me everything. "Told you what?" That you made her feel small, that you never listened, that you cared more about legacy than love. "That's a lie." She said you ignored her wishes. "Then read this." I pulled the envelope from my coat and held it out to her. Her name wasn't on it, just mine in Grace's hand. My daughter stared at it like it was a weapon. "She wrote that before the surgery," I said. "A month before she passed. She wanted me there, Emily. She wanted me beside her." Emily didn't take it. Her hand tightened around the mug. "She was confused by the end," she muttered. "You know that." "No, you made her seem confused. You took advantage of her silence." "She was sick." "She wasn't stupid." She took a step back. "I won't read it," she said finally. "It doesn't change anything." That was when I saw it, a flicker, not guilt, fear. I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't have to. Whatever she thought she buried with Grace, it wasn't gone. It was waiting. And so was I. The front lawn had been stripped of its soul. Where the mailbox once stood, hand-painted with our last name in Grace's cursive, there was now a sterile black box screwed into a stainless steel post. No name, no character, just a number. I slowed the car, staring at it like it might correct itself if I waited long enough. But the house didn't recognize me anymore. The hedges were trimmed back into surgical precision. The porch light had been replaced. The wind chimes Grace loved gone. I stepped out and walked to the front door, more out of instinct than hope. I reached into my coat for my key. It slid in, but didn't turn. I tried again. No movement, locked, changed. I stared through the frosted glass. The entry table was still there, but the bowl where Grace kept her keys had been cleared. A new runner carpet, an abstract painting where our family portrait once hung. Footsteps approached. A man walked by, leash in hand, his golden retriever trotting beside him. He nodded casually. "Didn't know you were selling, Tom." I blinked, selling. He shrugged. "Your daughter said the estate was transferring, figured you two were downsizing." I managed a polite nod, but my stomach was sinking. The porch steps felt heavier on the way down. That night back in my rental, I pulled out the old filing bin from the closet. It still smelled like cedar and dust. I flipped through manila folders labeled in Grace's neat script: taxes, home, medical, legal. The trust documents were near the bottom. Original signatures, both of ours. We made the house a joint asset with a transfer on death clause that gave it back to me fully. No sale, no transfer. I remembered her insisting on it, "So no one tampers with it," she said. But there was another copy. A newer one, dated 6 months ago. It listed Emily and only Emily as the sole inheritor of the house. My name had been struck. Grace's signature, it looked off. Not the graceful loops I knew. Sloppy, uneven. That was around the time she was in and out of the hospital, on painkillers and sedatives. She could barely hold a spoon then. I remember feeding her soup, wiping the corners of her mouth. There's no way she signed this in her right mind. My breath caught, my hands trembled. I turned the page. Grace's medical report. Cognitive impairment flagged. Signature date just 2 days later. I sat back, staring at the paper like it might catch fire from the weight of my disbelief. She was gone, and they'd stolen her house before the ground even settled over her. My daughter, my own flesh, had signed her name over mine. This wasn't incompetence. This was erasure, quiet, strategic, legal. But I still had the original. And I still had her voice. They may have taken the house, but I hadn't buried the truth yet. Mr. Peters still used the same brass nameplate on his office door, the one Grace used to polish with her scarf every time we visited. "Looks like it belongs in a museum," she used to tease him. He looked up from his desk when I entered, brows lifting in that familiar arch. "Tom," he said, standing slowly, "I was expecting you. Emily mentioned you might stop by." "She did she?" I sat without waiting for an offer. "I have questions about Grace's will." He gave a tired sigh, folding his hands. "As far as the file goes, Tom, we only had one final version, the one submitted by Emily. She said Grace never completed the revision you two discussed." "That's a lie," I said, reaching into my coat pocket. I pulled out my old phone, scratched, sluggish, but never wiped. Grace couldn't write the revision down herself, so she recorded it, the night before her surgery. He took the phone gently, like it might crack under his fingers. "Play it," I said. He tapped. Her voice filled the room, quiet, steady, a little breathless. "This is Grace Holloway. I want to dictate the revisions to my will. My husband Thomas should remain primary inheritor of our home, savings, and medical proxy. I do not want Emily involved in decisions regarding the estate. I love her, but she's not ready. I'm of sound mind, and this is my intention." It was dated, time-stamped, unmistakably her. Mr. Peters sat back, mouth slightly open. "She didn't trust her," he muttered. "She was right not to." He turned to his computer, eyes narrowing as he typed into his client database. The will on file was emailed to me from Grace's email, a PDF, no physical drop-off, just a scanned version. "Check the metadata," I said. He glanced at me, then opened the file details. It took a moment. He stiffened. "The IP address. This isn't from her home," he whispered. "This came from a commercial line, a business ISB tied to Derek's firm." My heart pounded, but my voice stayed quiet. She was in the hospital that day, on a ventilator. He turned pale. This is fraud, he said finally. Intentional, documented criminal. I leaned forward. Then let's treat it like that. He nodded slowly. We'll submit the recording to the court. We'll request an injunction. The estate can be frozen while we investigate. If this holds, your daughter could be facing real consequences. I'm not after punishment, I said. I want what Grace wanted. Mr. Peters looked at the phone still glowing on his desk, her voice lingering in the air like a ghost that refused to be buried. She wanted you to fight, he said softly. I stood. She wanted me to finish what she started. The attic still smelled like cedar, dust, and summer storms. Grace never liked coming up here, said it made her chest feel tight, but she kept her most private things above the rafters, behind the insulation and forgotten holiday boxes. I found the chest by feel, heavy, locked with a clasp that clicked the same way it did 20 years ago when we bought it at that antique fair in Maine. The key was still taped to the bottom. She never trusted digital safes. She trusted ink, paper, and privacy. Inside, beneath old photographs, tucked between yellowing stationery and dried flower petals, were her journals leather-bound, cracked at the spines, filled with the voice I had missed more than breath. I flipped past sketches of gardens and sermon notes. Then I saw the headline, underlined in deep blue. If Emily ever turns against you. The page was dense with her handwriting, lists, steps, warnings. Keep original trust copies separate. Never rely on shared devices. Emily loves control more than truth. If she pressures you, call Peters. Do not let her manage your medical care. My chest tightened. She had known, not just feared it, but seen it coming like a slow storm on the horizon, and she had prepared for me. A folded sheet slipped out from the back of the journal, a letter I hadn't seen before. Tom, if you're reading this, then I wasn't strong enough to say it out loud, but you always were. Don't let grief keep you from seeing clearly. If our daughter forgets who she was raised to be, remind her, but not with anger, with truth. I drove straight to Mr. Peters' office, chest buckled into the passenger seat like it was carrying something alive. When he opened the journal, his brow furrowed. This is a roadmap. She wrote it before the cancer advanced, I said, when she was still strong, before the medication, before the silence. He nodded. It establishes pattern, awareness, intent, combined with the voice memo and the original trust you found. It's enough, I asked. To bring it before the court, absolutely. He photocopied every page carefully, like sacred text. I watched her handwriting appear line by line on the glass. I'll file the petition to challenge the current will, he said. We'll seek an injunction and submit the evidence to probate. With this, the court has grounds to invalidate the forged version. I looked at the ink-stained paper in his hands, her loops, her margins, her truth. All these weeks I'd been drowning in grief. Now, something else was blooming beneath the pain. Not rage. Resolve. She didn't leave me behind. She left me instructions, a trail of breadcrumbs back to the life we built, and now I was following it. For her, for us. The calls started 2 days after Peters filed the petition. First came the messages, curt, controlled. Then the voicemails. Dad, what are you doing? Then, you're tearing this family apart. And finally, haven't you done enough? I didn't respond. Silence, I've learned, unsettles people more than anger, especially those who depend on being heard more than being right. The house felt heavier that week, not with grief but with waiting, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, thick, unmoving, almost sacred. I brewed coffee but didn't drink it. I sat in Grace's old chair at the window and let the quiet stretch. Then one night I heard the car pull up, tires on gravel too fast. The knock was sharp, impatient. I opened the door and found Emily standing there, coat half-zipped, eyes wild. You could have called me, she snapped. You could have talked to me like an adult." I stepped aside, saying nothing. She walked in like it was still hers, the house, the air, the story. In the kitchen, she turned on the light and crossed her arms. "You're really dragging this through court. Mom is dead, Dad. Let her go." I studied her face. Her cheekbones, her stance, echoes of grace but hollow, all surface. "You let her go long before she died," I said quietly. She flinched. "That's not fair." I reached for the drawer and pulled out the printed metadata report, the IP address, the date, the file origin from Derek's office. "This is fair," I said. "This is the truth." Her lips parted, then closed again. I slid it across the table. "Was it worth it, erasing your mother's wishes for a second car and a fancier dining table?" The color drained from her face. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "How was it then?" She looked away. Her silence said more than any defense could. I watched her eyes scan the room, the old fruit bowl, the crooked photo of her sixth-grade piano recital still hanging by the fridge. She looked like a stranger trying to remember a childhood she'd already rewritten. "You're going to ruin everything," she muttered. "No, you already did," I replied. "I'm just setting the record straight." She didn't respond. She stood there twisting her ring before finally walking out without another word. No slammed door, no apology. The silence she left behind felt colder than her words. That night I sat by the window again, looking at the dark sky. I thought about the funeral, how she cried, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief she never used again. Not a single tear for Grace, just for show. But justice doesn't cry, it waits. And I could feel it getting closer. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old books. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, the voice memo queued on the phone in my coat pocket. It was the only thing keeping me from shaking. Emily walked in ahead of Derek, wearing a modest black dress and an expression of forced calm. Derek's tie was crooked, his smile less confident than usual. They looked like they were walking into a photo shoot. "Not a reckoning." Mr. Peters nodded to me, then stood. The judge gave the signal and the hearing began. Peters opened with the timeline: Grace's illness, her attempted revision, and the sudden appearance of the digital will after her death. "Your Honor, the defense claims this was Grace Holloway's final and only will," Peters said. "But what we found tells another story." He played the voice memo. Grace's voice filled the chamber, quiet but sure. "Tom should remain primary inheritor. Emily is not to manage any part of the estate." The judge leaned forward, listening intently. Emily stared at the floor. Then came the metadata analysis. Peters showed the court how the final will came from an IP address traced to Derek's corporate office, submitted during a time Grace was in the ICU, barely conscious. I watched Derek stiffen, inching away from her without realizing it. His hand dropped from her shoulder. Emily stood. "That's circumstantial. She told me what she wanted. She didn't trust Dad. She said he was controlling. She wanted me to handle things." The judge raised a hand. "Do you have written or recorded confirmation of that?" Emily blinked. "She told me she didn't write it down." Peters raised the journal. "But she did, in her own hand, and we have multiple entries outlining concerns about Emily's behavior and her intent to keep her as far from the estate as possible." He submitted copies. Next came Maria's affidavit, the neighbor's timeline, the hospital's records of Grace's sedation during the date of the forged signature. Everything aligned. Derek cleared his throat. "I had no idea the will came from my office. That wasn't me. Emily handled that part." She turned to him, horrified. "You said it was taken care of." "I said you said it was taken care of," he muttered. Her voice cracked. "You're just going to stand there and let me." The judge's gavel cut through it. "I've heard enough." He turned to Emily. "What you've done is not only deeply unethical, it may be criminal. A formal investigation will proceed. To me, he said, Mr. Holloway, the court recognizes the voice recording and journal evidence. The original will is hereby restored. My hands didn't move. My eyes didn't blink. I sat still, staring at the woman I once held as a baby. Emily broke into quiet sobs. But they weren't for Grace. They were for herself. Not guilt, just fear. And as I looked at her, I knew I hadn't just lost my wife. I'd lost my daughter long before that. The grass hadn't grown back yet. I stepped out of the car and into the quiet. The wind moved through the cemetery like it had somewhere to be, bending the trees just enough to remind me I wasn't in control of anything out here. Her name was etched cleanly into the stone, Grace Holloway. No quotes, no flowers carved into the granite, just her name, 2 dates, and a silence that said more than words ever could. I stood there for a long time before I reached into my coat and unfolded the court ruling. It shook slightly in my hands, whether from wind or memory, I wasn't sure. They listened, I said. They believed you, it's done. I crouched and placed the journals beside the headstone. I didn't want them locked in an attic anymore. They deserved daylight. You were right, I whispered. I closed my eyes and for the first time let her voice echo without resistance, not the one in court or the memo, but the real one, laughing in the garden while cutting basil, mumbling crossword clues under her breath, humming when she thought no one was listening. And the last time she held my hand, barely able to lift her head, and said, "Don't let them erase us." Flashbacks cut through me in pieces. Her arm linked in mine at Emily's high school graduation. Her eyes shining when she read bedtime stories. Her panic, hidden just beneath the surface, when Emily started asking too many questions about the will. She knew, she saw what I refused to see. And I'd trusted the wrong person anyway. The cost wasn't just a house or a legal battle. It was that I'd spent the last months of Grace's life thinking our daughter would do the right thing. I handed over the pen. Emily used it to cross me out. I stood, bones creaking louder than I liked to admit. I kept my promise, Grace, I said. I told the truth. That night back home, my phone buzzed once. A text. "Can we talk?" From her. No apology, no explanation, just a request. I stared at the message. The screen lit up the room like it was waiting for redemption, but I felt nothing. No fury, no sorrow, just emptiness. You can love someone your whole life and still not recognize what they become when greed walks in. I deleted the message. No response. Some things break in ways that can't be mended. And sometimes silence isn't cruelty. It's mercy. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I held it above the signature line, reading over the new will for the 3rd time. No second guesses left. No space for doubt. Just ink, truth, and Grace's name at the top of every decision. The house gone to a local women's shelter we once supported quietly, back when Grace was alive and full of fire. She always said safety shouldn't be a luxury. The trust broken into 4 equal scholarships for home caregivers, the kind who sit through the night beside hospital beds, warming soup and listening more than speaking. Grace would have smiled at that. I signed. The sound of the pen scratching across paper made my chest tighten, like I'd just sealed a door I'd never open again. Later that day, I packed the last box. Old photos, wrinkled ticket stubs, birthday cards, her handwriting on grocery lists, and one picture I paused over Grace in the hospital bed, cradling Emily just hours after she was born, her eyes still swollen from labor, her smile brighter than anything in that sterile room. I stared at it longer than I should have. She loved her deeply, so did I. But love alone doesn't protect legacy. I wrapped the frame in an old scarf and set it gently on top. The house sold quickly. Good market. A young couple expecting their first child bought it. They walked through it with awe, pointing at the wide windows and the garden space out back where Grace used to plant rosemary. I didn't tell them what had happened there. I wanted their story to begin clean. The notice ran in the paper the next morning. In memory of Grace Holloway, legacy reclaimed. Small font, bottom corner, but enough. I stood by the curb during the closing, keys in hand, papers in my folder. A breeze picked up, tugging at my collar. Then I saw her. Emily, standing across the street, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching. She didn't come closer. She didn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. Not the kind you cry at a funeral. The kind that come when the door is finally locked, and you realize you're not on the other side of it anymore. She watched me hand the keys to the new owners, watched them shake my hand, thank me, and walk inside. I met her eyes once. She didn't flinch, but I didn't wave. I turned, opened the car door, and slid inside. The engine hummed like it was waiting to carry me into something lighter. As I pulled away, I glanced at the rearview mirror. She was still standing there, still crying, still silent. And for the first time since Grace passed, I felt stillness without sorrow. Peace. Finally,